The United States hasn't pressed Israel to end its occupation on the grounds that the Palestinian leadership is not unified. In addition to the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, you have Hamas, you have Islamic Jihad, you have the Popular Front, these groups, some of which engage in terrorism, some of which do not recognize Israel, none of which are particularly democratic. Contrast this with the Western Saharans. The Polisario is unified. People see it as not everybody agrees on their policies. There's dissent, but they recognize them as their government, single government. There's no rival faction there. They have never questioned Morocco's right to exist. They have never engaged in terrorism, and they're relatively democratic. In other words, they've pretty much done things right. So it also sends the message that the Palestinians, even if the Palestinians finally got their act together, the U.S. wouldn't support their self-determination either, because we're not doing it for the for the Western Saharans. And that's another really bad lesson. More people would have heard of Western Sahara if they were engaging in terrorism, but they decided not to do that. They've taken the high road. That their guerrilla army has only fought occupation forces inside Western Sahara, and they've gone the diplomatic route. Yeah, again, and the reward is continued occupation with the backing of Western powers, and as you say, a frozen conflict.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm speaking to Dr. Stephen Zunes, who's a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, where he serves as coordinator of the program in Middle Eastern Studies. He has written several important books on the politics in West Asia and North Africa, among others, Tinderbox, US Foreign Policy and the Roots of Terrorism, Sudan's 2019 Revolution, The Power of Civil Resistance, and the issue we actually want to discuss today, Western Sahara, War, Nationalism, and Conflict Irresolution. Dr. Zunes, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Zunes, I really wanted to discuss with you Western Sahara, because I know nothing about this conflict, and it seems just one of these issues that really ought to be understood better. So could you maybe give us a rundown of what exactly is that conflict about?
Well, Western Sahara is a country on the Atlantic coast of North Africa, just south of Morocco, and just north and west of Mauritania. It's formerly known as the Spanish Sahara. It was one of Spain's two colonial possessions on the African continent. But Spain, like Portugal, held on to their African possessions longer than others, and an armed revolution began in 1973 by the people of Western Sahara wanting independence, and Spain promised to hand it over to them at the end of 1975. However, both Morocco and Mauritania had other ideas. They wanted to annex the territory and bypass an act of self-determination, which is required. If you're a non-self-governing territory that is a colony, you have the right of self-determination, including the option of independence. And so, and the International Court of Justice ruled that whatever the historical claims that these countries might have to that territory, this right of self-determination was paramount. A UN investigation found the vast majority of the population wanted independence under the leadership of the Polisario Front, which was the National Liberation Movement, not union with either of the neighbors. And the UN Security Council and UN General Assembly also went on record calling for self-determination. But Morocco ended up invading, and they've occupied much of the territory ever since then. There was a long armed struggle that was suspended in 1990 when Morocco finally agreed to have a referendum on the fate of the territory. But they never went through with it. And even though there are repeated resolutions by the Security Council that a plebiscite referendum where the people could decide whether they wanted to be part of Morocco or an independent country, it should go ahead. Morocco again refused. And the United States and France, that were Morocco's main allies, prevented the Security Council from enforcing the resolution under Chapter 7. In which case they could have sanctions or other kinds of pressure. So Morocco really had no incentive to to compromise. Well, in the fall of 2020, with Morocco continuing to violate the ceasefire agreement on a number of fronts, they had occupied about 75% of the territory at this point. The Polisario resumed the armed struggle. But it's been very difficult because Morocco has built this big separation barrier, cordoning off their section of the territory, and nowadays with drone warfare, desert guerrilla combat is not as effective. So the armed struggle has not advanced very much, hasn't moved Morocco at all. A significant development took place in December of that year, in the final weeks of Trump's presidency, in which the United States became the first country to formally recognize Morocco's annexation of the Western Sahara. Israel followed just earlier this year, becoming the second country. But this was quite shocking to much of the international community, the U.S. diplomatic corps, people in both parties in Congress, because it's the first time, really, since the signing of the UN Charter, where the United States has recognized the takeover of an entire country by another. Because Western Sahara, I should mention, is a full member state of the African Union. It's been recognized by over 80 countries at one time or another. They have a diplomatic presence in many capitals around the world. So essentially, the United States was recognizing the forcible takeover of one African country by another, which has really strained U.S. relations with Africa, and of course has led charges of hypocrisy, given the U.S. strong position vis-a-vis Russia's illegal annexations of parts of Ukraine. The Biden administration has not reversed this decision, as many people had expected that they would.
The viewers of this channel are generally accustomed to seeing one set of rules for one group of countries applied, and another set of rules for another kind of country, which coincidentally always coincide with geopolitical interest of the
Yes.
United States. A pure coincidence, but
yes.
So this is nothing special. But what is special to me is that we have this conflict inside Africa, because on the one hand, okay, we know that there are conflicts inside African states, but most African conflicts are actually intra-state
Right.
conflicts. With the exception of the Horn of Africa on the other side, in the east, there are very few interstate conflicts. How is it that Morocco has these strong claims, having itself been a colony back in the past? What's the dynamic there?
It is a very interesting one, actually. And when the Organization of African Unity was established, and subsequently evolved into the African Union, one of the key provisions was that, as arbitrary as the state boundaries of Africa may have been, due to colonial machinations, that they needed to be respected. Otherwise, you'd have wars breaking out all over the place. And every single member of the OAU signed that, except for Somalia and Morocco, which had these eruditus claims on their neighbors. And it was also in the mid-70s, of course, that Somalia tried to claim the Ogaden region of eastern Ethiopia by force. They were repelled, but Morocco did get away with conquering much of Western Sahara. So, yeah, they've definitely been an outlier in the African community by that. I should mention that, though, the actual specific boundaries of Western Sahara, where they carved it out between with the French colony, neighboring French colonies, are somewhat arbitrary. The Sahrawis, that is the ethnic group that populate Western Sahara, are distinct from the Moroccans. I mean, they are both of mixed Arab and Berber ancestry. They both are Sunni Muslims in large part, but they speak a dialect called Hassaniya, which is very different than Moroccan, the Arabic spoken in Morocco. Their kinship system is different. They're traditionally nomadic peoples, so they've never had an emir or a sultan. They were never part of the Ottoman Empire, so they have this history of freedom, whereas Morocco has been a centralized state for many centuries. They practice a form of Islam that is fairly liberal on certain ways. Women, for example, had equal rights to inheritance and divorce. They keep their maiden names. And the Moroccan occupation forces, see the Sahrawi women's kind of uppity as a result, and there's been, sexual abuse and nasty things going on in the prisons there. But the Sahrawi population are all of Western Sahara, plus parts of northern Mauritania, far western Algeria, and far southern Morocco in the Tafaya region. But the Western Sahara, the Polisario is only calling for independence in the internationally recognized borders of the former Spanish colony. But to get back to your original question, yes, Morocco being both colonized and the colonizer is is an interesting question. Moroccans don't see themselves that way, of course. They've been convinced that Western Sahara has always been Moroccan, based on the idea that some tribal leaders back in the 19th century declared their fealty to the Sultan. But again, the World Court, now they're saying that does not constitute sovereignty. And again, the right of self-determination is paramount. While the Moroccans see it as an interstate conflict between them and Algeria, because Algeria has traditionally supported the Polisario, the ones that have armed them historically. About a third of the Sahrawi population are refugees living in these refugee camps in far western Algeria, near Tindouf, where the Algerians have given them effective sovereignty. So the Polisario, what's officially known as the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, do control the about a third of the population, as well as some of the nomadic areas in the liberated zones in the eastern part of the country. But the Moroccans have the government has convinced most of its citizens that that the Sahrawis are happy to be Moroccans, and it's only these paid Algerian agents that are dissenting. Though, of course, the very fact that they won't allow a free and fair referendum, I think, is some indication of how they recognize things would turn out if there was indeed a vote.
Yeah, and the geography of West Sahara is quite important, right? It is long and narrow, and the part that is controlled by Morocco is in the west to the Atlantic, and then there's a river, and on the other side of the river, there's the land controlled by the Sahrawis.
There's not a river; it's actually a wall, the
Oh,
largest
it's a wall.
separation barrier in the world, well over 1,200 kilometers in length, and so that's what's that is what's separating. That's how the Moroccans were able to largely defeat the insurgency. And it was this war of attrition, which was very costly to Morocco, that forced them to agree to the referendum initially, even though, again, they didn't follow through. Within the Moroccan occupied territory, I should mention, the repression is quite severe. While Morocco itself, has some human rights abuses. They improved somewhat under the current king within Morocco itself, but in the occupied Western Sahara, it is incredibly repressive. I've been to 87 countries, including Iraq under Saddam and Indonesia under Suharto. I've never seen a worse police state. Indeed, Freedom House ranks Moroccan occupied Western Sahara second only to Syria in terms of the denial of political freedom. And any expression of a desire for self-determination, for independence, waving the Western Sahara flag, anything like that, the crackdown would be very violent and immediate. People are disappeared regularly. There has been an ongoing nonviolent movement inside, led by a remarkable woman named Aminatu Haidar. She's been called the Saharan Gandhi. She's been nominated multiple times for the Nobel Peace Prize. She's already won the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, the Right Livelihood Award, several European awards as well. She's been tortured repeatedly. I mean, it's just a very, very difficult situation. But the nonviolent resistance has continued. In fact, many people see the Arab Spring as essentially happening there because 2 months before Tunisia, there was a big encampment, about 20,000 Sahrawis camping out, demanding greater civil liberties, end of the discrimination. They were too scared to actually call for independence, but just yeah, but that was sort of implied. And the Moroccans came and brutally wiped it out, killed quite a number of people. But you know, the resistance has been continuing, both the resumption of the armed struggle out in the desert and the various forms of non-cooperation and nonviolent direct action within the Moroccan occupied territory as well.
What's the split of the population of those living under Moroccan occupation and Sahrawis living basically under self-governance?
Slightly more than two-thirds of the population is under Moroccan occupation. Another third are in the camps and in liberated zones. There's also an exile community. There are some of the younger people are in university or high school, boarding schools in Algeria, but also quite a few living in Spain and some other European countries as well.
And we are talking about a total population of how many million?
Not many. In fact, probably only more like a 500,000.
Half a
One thing
million.
that's complicated things, though, is that Morocco has brought in settlers. Indeed,
Mm.
Moroccan settlers now outnumber the indigenous Sahrawis in the occupied territory by more than 3 to 1. The
Mm.
other one, of course, they're given preferences and jobs and everything else. They are given quite a few subsidies, tax breaks, and other things, encouraging people to move down there. So these aren't ideological settlers like some of the Israeli settlers in the West Bank are. These are people who are generally going for the incentives. They usually hold on to their properties in Marrakesh or Tangier or Casablanca or wherever they're from. Um, but you know they're really changing the demographics, and they basically are trying to indoctrinate the younger Sahrawis and speaking in the Moroccan dialect and learning Moroccan history from from the Moroccans' perspectives, teaching them French instead of Spanish, and you know generally doing their best to erase their history.
It sounds very eerily similar to another horrible conflict, but we will talk about that one in the second part. Let me rather ask you maybe about this colonial history, because in your book you actually write about a consensus between the French and the Americans, but I mean, West Sahara was a heirloom of the Spanish, right? Which is also why the Sahrawis. I was contacted by a Sahrawi viewer of this channel, and he wrote to me in Spanish. So,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about this constellation?
Well, sure. I mean, interestingly, some of the speaking Spanish is, even though it's a colonial language, has become sort of a sign of resistance to the French. Occasionally, you'll see people who graffitied the French names of various streets in what the Moroccans call Layun, what the Sahrawis call El Ayun. Graffiti them into the old Spanish names. You know, Spain, though, was initially Spain agreed to hand over the territory in effect, back in 1975 due to pressure from the United States. This is the time that Francisco Franco, the long-term fascist general who'd been the dictator there, was on his deathbed, and the Americans didn't want to see Spain distracted by a possible conflict with Morocco while they're trying to settle things, especially in light of Portugal's hard turn to the left the year before when their fascist regime went down. And also, while the Polisario was never a communist or even Marxist, they were definitely leftist. They were part of that 1970s, third world revolutionary milieu. And Kissinger said, "Oh, we can't have another Angola in the North Atlantic." You know, this very rigid bipolar kind of worldview that he was notorious for. And so there was strong pressure on Spain. They offered to provide them up the rent on bases and provide them other kinds of aid to convince them to turn it over. Those Spaniards have felt kind of guilty about it since. The problem, though, is that even under their center-left government, they've actually become somewhat more pro-Moroccan in recent years. Joining the French and some of the other more traditional European allies of the Moroccans. But the reason, apparently, is that as you know, Spain is barely 15 kilometers from the northern tip of Morocco. They have and also they have these two presidios, these actual Spanish territory, which is on the African mainland. in the northern littoral of Morocco on the Mediterranean. And this is where people from not just Morocco, but from throughout Africa try to come up to cross into Europe. Others try getting these rickety boats and try to cross the Canary Islands, which are also, just off the coast of Morocco. And the Moroccans, have tried to keep this tide, keep people from going. But they've pretty much gotten let the Spaniards know if Spain crosses them on the Western Sahara issues, they're not going to hold back anymore. Indeed, when the president of Western Sahara, who lives in the camps in Tindouf in Western Algeria, got COVID about a year and a half ago, he flew to Spain for treatment, and in retaliation, the Moroccans essentially opened the floodgates in Malula and let thousands of these Africans cross into Spanish territory for the weekend, and kind of serving notice that we're willing to do this again. And this is a concern actually throughout Europe that especially the center left parties, if there's a big influx of immigrants, who gets blamed, and how and it actually helps the far right. And so essentially we're talking about extortion here, where the Moroccans have been pushing making the Spaniards and some other Europeans basically say that, hey, you have to play along with us on Western Sahara, or we're going to allow this massive influx of migrants into Europe. The other thing that is interesting is that the Moroccans have been pressuring the Europeans to sign these fisheries agreements and free trade agreements, not distinguishing between Morocco and Western Sahara. And the Europeans wanting these free trade agreements, these fishery agreements, have agreed to that. And each time it's gone to the European court, and the European court has invalidated them because of its failure to distinguish between Morocco and the occupied Western Sahara. They've made similar decisions vis-a-vis products from the Israeli-occupied West Bank, from the settlements there. So even though the European court has so far ruled out these things, the European countries are really pushing to help Morocco in this regard. There'll be another. They've appealed. There's going to be another decision coming down, I think, in April or May of this coming year regarding the legality of these agreements.
It's amazing. Brings us back to this topic of hypocrisy, because this is a similar situation to Turkey, where the European Union has basically parked 2 to 3 million refugees from Syria, right? And this has given the Erdogan a bargaining chip to say, like, hey, either play along or at least leave me alone, or I'm going to open these gates, right? And you see the structural use of people as bargaining chips. So Morocco doing the same with Spain and with the rest of the European Union, and then of course trying to establish a fact that over time then becomes maybe even lawfully recognized. That must.
And this bribery scandal we've been hearing about in the European Parliament and elsewhere, Qatar, the bribery with the of Qatar has gotten the most publicity, but Morocco is also very much part of this as well, where they have suitcases full of euros. I mean, it hasn't been subtle that they are trying to get their influence that way as well. Now, none have gone as far as the United States and Israel in formally recognizing the annexation, because again, they recognize the very dangerous precedent that would set in terms of international law. But then they are quite willing to sort of look the other way and sweep the conflict under the rug. And it is rather striking, really, even among people who are aware of international politics, even activists who are are in solidarity with popular struggles in the global South. I mean, even among fairly educated people. It's stunning how few people have even heard of Western Sahara or really know about the conflict and some of the very very real issues here, because even though we are talking about a pretty small country in terms of population, if Morocco gets away with this annexation, it'll be the first time since the signing of the United Nations Charter where a country has expanded its territory by force and gotten and been formally recognized as having done so. And and similarly, it would be the first time we've had a non-self-governing territory as a colony that was not provided the right of self-determination. And we do have places like Puerto Rico um, and the French Caribbean, but they have chosen to be part of the colonizing country. They had the choice, but again, Western Sahara has not had that choice, and until they do, it is still a colony legally, and really the last colony that we see in Africa.
So you have explained why the European Union and France tags along. You've explained how Spain is basically under constant threat that if they don't, then a lot of people will come in. Why does the United States play along? Is it Israel or is it anything? Is something else?
Oh, the United States has always been strongly pro Moroccan from the outset.
But why?
Yeah. Well, again, it was seen as a leftist movement that we wanted to suppress. I mean, in the early 80s, the Polisario had actually liberated 85% of the territory. I mean, they were defeating the Moroccans, but then Reagan under Reagan, there was a dramatic increase of military equipment. In fact, U.S. Special Forces came into Western Sahara to train the Moroccans and better counterinsurgency operations. The French brought in some paratroopers and got involved. Saudi Arabia sent in a bunch of money. So there was, the United States and France played a major role in turning the tide of the war. But the United States, again, it was seen in these very stark Cold War terms. But Morocco was always a big ally of the United States in terms of basing rights, and this is the time when much of the Arab world and Africa was getting more and more, leftist and nationalistic, and some cases even pro-Soviet and experimenting with socialist economies. Now, Morocco has always been very much into foreign investment and capitalism and strategic ties, and we like to reward that. And even when the Cold War is over, they became then the big ally in the so-called War on Terror. And in fact, they're one of the black sites where people suspects for torture, that kind of thing. And so again, it's more that I think at this point, especially since the Polisario has been over backwards to say, wait, we believe in a free market. We want to be an Atlantic power. I mean, they've really gone over there backwards. They actually have a fairly democratic governing system. They actually have competitive elections and the like. There's a freedom to dissent. It's actually, I've visited the camps a number of times. It's one of the freest societies I found anywhere in the Arab world. But I think it's more about hurting King Mohammed, because basically he's put so much lives and resources and everything in, as is his father, and consolidating his occupation. And he's convinced the people of Morocco that they are welcoming it, and they're just trying to stop Algerian aggression. If they had a free and fair referendum and they lost, people would be pretty angry, because they're already pretty upset at the government, the rampant corruption, the ineptitude, the political repression, the fact that it's one of the worst in North Africa in terms of social statistics like infant mortality, life expectancy, basic things. A lot of dissatisfaction, incredible inequality. I mean, there's a lot of upset in Morocco, and I think if they actually went ahead and had a if Morocco ended up losing Western Sahara, I think there's fear that might be the last straw, and that could turn things, and then the king could be ousted, and who knows what would replace him. I mean, personally, I think the monarchy is a little more solid than that, but I think part of it's the underlying concern is that we just the need to support the ally. Now, the formal recognition that Trump did, which is again taking it a step further than previous administrations, was in return for Morocco recognizing Israel, part of these so-called Abraham Accords. We got UAE and Bahrain to sign on, by offering them these special arms deals. We got Sudan to sign on by taking them off the terrorist list. We got Morocco to sign in return for recognizing their illegal takeover. And I think this might be why Biden is reluctant to rescind the recognition, even though he could do that quite easily with the stroke of a pen. Because if he did that, Morocco would then break off relations with Israel in retaliation, and people would say, "Oh, Biden is against Israel and against the peace process," and there'd be that kind of feedback. So in fact, the Biden administration has not formally reconfirmed it either. Whenever, I mean, it's ridiculous. Every time the Secretary of State Blinken or somebody else is asked about this, he'd say, "We support the efforts of the United Nations Special Emissary." But do you hold this recognition? We support the effort of the United Nations Special Representative. I mean, it's kind of funny. But on the other hand, if you look at any maps, any U.S. government maps, you'll find no distinction between Morocco and Western Sahara. I mean,
Oh,
if you look at Google, Apple, Rand McNally, National Geographic, almost any other maps, you'll see Morocco and Western Sahara as separate countries, or at least hash marks or something to
a dotted
show
line.
that is so that is distinct. But all U.S. government maps, one country, no demarcation whatsoever.
And that's only since 2020, or that has
Yes,
been for a long time?
only since 2020.
Yeah, so it's interesting how these different countries get caught in a web of inconveniences, right? Because
Yes.
there's nothing inherently that would push them to recognize to recognize this, but there's good secondary reasons, and
Yeah.
that is all like turned against the Sahrawis. But is the situation at the moment where the border is that one stable, or do you think Morocco will try to eliminate the rest and get it under their control?
You mean beyond Western Sahara?
Because part of Western Sahara is actually under
Oh yeah, yeah,
Sahrawi
yes.
control,
I'm
right?
sorry. The liberated zones. Yeah, probably not. Simply because the no mineral resources there, as far as we know, unlike the lucrative phosphate mines in the Moroccan area. All the major cities are in the Moroccan territory. Um, and the wall separation wall has been holding firm. So there really isn't much of um, a incentive for them to go further. Hardly anybody lives there. And not to mention all the landmines, and I mean it would be difficult for them to do. Though I should mention that one reason that Algeria has been supportive of the Polisario is that Morocco does have irredentist ambitions beyond Western Sahara. There is this ideology of Le Grand Maroc, a Greater Morocco, which includes Western Algeria and pretty much all of Mauritania. Indeed, Morocco took Morocco a couple of years before they recognized Mauritania after it became independent from France in 1960. And in 1963, they invaded Western Algeria. It was known as the Sand War. And eventually Algerians pushed them back to the internationally recognized border. But there's concern about Moroccan aggrandizement and their interest in controlling more of their part of the Maghreb.
And maybe last question here. In your book, you use the term irresolution,
Yes.
irresolution of the conflict. What do you refer to with that one?
Well, the fact that it hasn't been resolved. And it's disturbing that, and things seem to be a stalemate. And this is disturbing in addition to the international legal implications, is that this does it's led to an arms race between Morocco and Algeria. It's made it very difficult for the Arab Maghreb Union to really solidify, which has hurt the economies of the area, which is itself has contributed to the greater migration. Certainly, the credibility of the United States in particular, but some European countries as well, is compromised. When we're trying to unite the world and stop being Russians from trying to take to annex parts of Ukraine while supporting this annexation. And one of the Morocco has tried to say has tried to supposedly compromise by saying they have this autonomy plan for Western Sahara, which has been endorsed by the Spaniards and the French and the Americans and others. But if you read the fine print, it's not much autonomy. And the authority would ultimately be with the king. And of course, we've seen how when authoritarian regimes have granted autonomy to regions like Haile Selassie in Eritrea um, and Yugoslavia with Kosovo, we've seen that things have broken down. It's gotten really, really nasty. But the main reason is that, if Sahrawis wanted autonomy under Moroccan control, that would be that they could choose that. But the definition of self-determination requires the option of independence, and this Moroccan, U.S., French, Spanish-backed Moroccan proposal does not allow for that option, and so it would not be an act of self-determination. So things remain irresolved.
That is very sad to hear, because it seems like a frozen conflict. I mean, it is obviously a frozen conflict, and it could get worse. This could blow up again. But
yeah, very. And one of the sad things about is that if you compare it to the Israeli occupation, the United States hasn't pressed Israel to end its occupation on the grounds that the Palestinian leadership is not unified. In addition to the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, you have Hamas, you have Islamic Jihad, you have the Popular Front, these groups, some of which engage in terrorism, some of which do not recognize Israel, none of which are particularly democratic. Contrast this with the Western Saharans. The Polisario is unified. People see it as not everybody agrees on their policies. There's dissent, but they recognize them as their government, single government. There's no rival faction there. They have never questioned Morocco's right to exist. They have never engaged in terrorism, and they're relatively democratic. In other words, they've pretty much done things right. So it also sends the message that the Palestinians, even if the Palestinians finally got their act together, the U.S. wouldn't support their self-determination either, because we're not doing it for the for the Western Saharans. And that's another really bad lesson. More people would have heard of Western Sahara if they were engaging in terrorism, but they decided not to do that. They've taken the high road. Their guerrilla army has only fought occupation forces inside Western Sahara, and they've gone the diplomatic route. Yeah, again, and the reward is continued occupation with the backing of Western powers, and as you say, a frozen conflict.